I'm going to semi-level chest thump on this one. I've been right on this story. The Andrew Cuomo story, I was following this story going all the way back to the ProPublica piece. I think this was like a year ago, to recounting the number of deaths in those nursing homes and the decision that Cuomo made to basically send people to nursing homes and not allow those people to be tested. Yeah, that's kind of problematic, especially when you're mandating people going to nursing homes and you're mandating that those people don't get tested when they're in those homes unless they're showing some kind of symptom. That's problematic. You basically lock people into a situation where it's a death pit. Call it what it is. These are the death panels that Sarah Palin was talking about. They were just a little too soon. I mean, you basically put the most vulnerable population and said you can't test those people. And on top of the vulnerable population, well, you have people who are doctors, you have people who are nurses, you have staff. All of those people were health susceptible at that point. 28% of the people that died in New York were in those nursing homes, 1% of the population. So, yeah, Cuomo's choices in that were problematic. Not to mention the other provision that basically gave legal, waiving any level of culpability from the standpoint of the nursing homes themselves to be held legally responsible for it. Yeah, Cuomo's actions in New York were reprehensible. And then to hide the numbers. Oh, to hide the numbers. When Letitia James pulled that lawsuit that made the point that says he's hiding the numbers and we think the numbers are 50% higher, we hit that story. And while we were hitting that story, you had people still trying to gloss over this very specific point. CNN, if I'm not mistaken. No, we were right on this story. We're right on a lot of stories. So I am going to take that moment to pat ourselves on the back for this. Cuomo's troubles have gotten deeper. They've gotten worse. And the question, honestly, is getting to the point of whether or not Cuomo is even going to survive the investigations that are taking place. I mean, there was already an investigation that was going into the sexual assault allegations or harassment allegations. But keep in mind, that was like the third item. The first thing, now with the way all of this started, were the deaths. He killed my grandma. He hid the death of my grandma after killing my grandma. It was that. So there was an investigation going into that thing and whether he was hiding that for federal reasons. And honestly, we had a good one on New York Post reporter. I'm going to play you a part of that clip because what he says and how he explains it of what is taking place in New York, how the media is absorbing that information, is making it look like Cuomo is in that much deeper trouble. Because this is not something where it seems like people are defending him. It seems like universally going after him. There's been another woman to come out and blame Cuomo for sexual assault. And this one is actually far more problematic. Disgusting is a word that you can use for it. I think that's Blasio's word. This one is worse than the other ones. I mean, the other ones were Cuomo behaving inappropriately. In one case, you had him trying to kiss somebody. But this one was basically bringing somebody to the office and groping them aggressively. So yeah, this has gotten that much worse. New York Times, right here. I'll just read it. Right here. An aide to Governor Cuomo who accused the governor of improper behavior said Governor Cuomo had groped her in the executive mansion, according to new details of an account reported by the Times of Albany. The aide, who was not identified by the newspaper, said she was summoned to the governor's private residence last year to assist Mr. Cuomo with the technical issue when, alone on the second floor, the governor closed the door, reached under her blouse, and began touching her, the newspaper said. The new details of the account, which were reported on Wednesday, involved the most sexually aggressive allegation yet. The woman was the sixth person to accuse the governor of sexual harassment or inappropriate behavior. The newspaper reported on Tuesday that the allegation had been forwarded to the state attorney general, which is overseeing an inquiry into the sexual harassment claims against the governor. And if I am not mistaken, this one was also sent to I want to say the police, but I think that's somewhat more of a formality in the way that this goes. Yeah, that's rough. I mean, that's rough to hear. But think about the other allegations. Does this fall in line with the other allegations? Yes. I mean, you basically have him saying things or behaving inappropriately, putting his hands on people. I mean, think of the other case at the wedding party where he puts his hand on her back. She moves it away and he says, that's aggressive. He's saying that's aggressive. When he put his hand on her back, that's astonishing. I guess I'm making the point that the stories seem to fall in line with a certain pattern, if not necessarily exact. It's almost like it rhymes, even if it doesn't necessarily say the same tune. And yeah, this is problematic because the more you get, the more difficult it is to explain how all of these women are coming forward with a similar story. And honestly, with a similar theme in regards to the way the women look. I'm just saying, that's what it seems like. Not to mention, many of them worked with him as an aide. And there's this power dynamic that keeps coming up where he, governor of authority, people that work with him, it's like a buffet. Despite the fact that the food in this case doesn't want to be food, doesn't want to be eaten, doesn't want to be seen as food. And yet, here's Cuomo, hungry man. I want to go through a little bit of this case because I think Cuomo is in trouble. The moment that this came out, you had calls for his impeachment. The New York State Assemblyman Speaker authorized an impeachment investigation into Governor Cuomo. According to CBS News, New York State Assemblyman Carl, Heastie, said that authorized that the Assembly Judiciary Committee begin an investigation, which he said will have the powers to interview witnesses and subpoena documents. So for those of you keeping score, that means there will be 2 independent investigations into sexual misconduct claims by 6 women, including one of the Attorney General's office. The impeachment investigation comes after 59 lawmakers all signed a letter calling on Cuomo to step down. Yeah. How can he be effective in this situation? Think about what I mean. Your job as governor on some level has to be to work with the various people. And in the United States, it's even that much more difficult because it's not like a parliament where you have 2 sides. One side can just effect their will because all of the people are lumped together on the same team. Now, moving legislation through and everything else is an order of magnitude difficult or more difficult in the United States, meaning he has to be able to work with the various Democrats or for that matter, Republicans to get things accomplished. How can you work with somebody when you are facing all of these investigations, including potentially a federal investigation? And something that I didn't even think of, when Cuomo was actually hiding those numbers, he was writing a book on leadership. Was he getting money for the book on leadership? And if he was, would he have gotten and kept that book if the numbers were what they were? Meaning, if those numbers had floated up to the tune of 50% higher, would they have looked at Cuomo as a successful figure? And if they found out that he was hiding those numbers, would they look at Cuomo as a successful figure? Meaning, on some level, he had a fiduciary incentive to keep those numbers low, not just an incentive from the standpoint of the investigations. Yeah. The weird part about this is if Cuomo wouldn't have did anything and just let the numbers be what they were, the numbers would have been high, but none of this would be taking place. There would be no investigation. He would have just looked at it as making a bad choice. That's different than hiding the numbers. Hiding the numbers draws a circle around the fact that you hit the numbers, and it brings it that much more clear in this kind of bright contrast that, whoa, 28% of the people that died in New York died in those nursing homes, and 1% of the population. And more than that, New York lost 50,000 people, if not more than that. That looks bad, and I think the number's higher. Yeah. I might as well just show you the video now. So this is Bill de Blasio. De Blasio,
Called an employee of his.
de Blasio at this point seems to have no fucks to give. I have no idea how much power de Blasio has, or how much voice, or how far his voice goes. He's in New York City. He's the mayor of New York City. I don't necessarily know if that extends beyond anything else. I know people that I've met from around the world, even on the other side of the continent. When you hear New York, they think of New York City. They don't necessarily think of it as a state. So in that context, maybe, but I don't necessarily know how much gravitas de Blasio has. Whatever gravitas he does have, though, he is using it, and he is being brutal. This is not hedging at all. De Blasio has gone all in, basically saying, you need to get the fuck out. You need to go. You're going to be ineffective in that office. You're utterly disgusting. Leave. You think I'm joking? You think I'm putting too much on it? No, I'm not.
It's deeply troubling, the specific allegation. The governor called an employee of his, someone who he had power over, called them to a private place, and then sexually assaulted her, is absolutely unacceptable. It is disgusting to me. And he can no longer serve as governor. It's as simple as that.
De Blasio does have a point. Whether he's guilty or not of either of those items, be it the nursing home or, for the most part, the groping and the sexual harassment and the trying to kiss that person and the making that other person uncomfortable. I don't know if I did 6, but you get my point. How do you work with other members of Congress that find you to be radioactive and will find you to be radioactive for the length and the duration of the investigation? And again, the more women that come out, the more difficult this gets. The longer this gets dragged through as they talk to one woman after the next, after the next, after the next. And this is dripped, dripped, dripped from month to month to month. This is going to be brutal. The only question is he going to resign or is he going to be impeached? And either way, he's going to be basically ineffective in that office and potentially radioactive. Listen to Michael Goodwin. Michael Goodwin came onto the show, but listen to what Michael Goodwin says about, ask him a question about what is it like in New York right now, meaning what is the feeling in New York as Cuomo has discussed. I'm curious about whether or not he'd be able to outlast this, meaning can he put win after win after win and just kind of go on day after day after day and just dealing with it almost in this kind of emergency situation and make it through? Or is the media in New York and the people in the way that they're talking about this, is it such that he is considered to be guilty? And if that is true, oh Lord, that is going to be a brutal, brutal end. Listen to the story that he tells about the woman that is saying Cuomo assaulted her. And she almost basically had a nervous breakdown and told the story after seeing Cuomo say, I didn't do anything wrong. This is an amazing, meaning what he knows and what they're talking about in New York is pretty extensive and does not look good for one Cuomo.
You mentioned the media, is that you would be hard-pressed to say, well, this is a liberal paper and this is a conservative paper by the way they are covering Cuomo. In stark contrast to the way Donald Trump was covered by different media, with Cuomo, the New York Times and the New York Post, which you might consider polar opposites, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Daily News, all of the television, there is a unified approach in the sense that everybody sees this as serious. The New York Times, for example, which would be more inclined to be favorable to the Democratic governor, broke the story of one of the second woman to come forward, a woman named Charlotte Bennett, whom the Times contacted and was able to get from her full story. She then went to CBS, did a series of interviews with Norah O'Donnell. The Wall Street Journal has had some interesting stories. So it's across the spectrum. where you're seeing this sense that all the media recognizes this as a legitimate story, as legitimate grievances from these women and from the nursing home families. If I could, I'd like to just say a word about the women. As you said, there are now 6 of them. We don't yet know the name of the last one. She is the one who claims that the governor fondled her, and at his mansion, the governor's mansion. I would like to just tell you a little bit about what we know of her, because I think it gives you a sense of the environment that you asked about. She, as we know from the Times-Union in Albany, she was watching the governor's first press conference after these allegations came out. That was March 3rd, in which he said she still works for the state. She was in the executive office wing of the Capitol building. She was there watching on television with colleagues when the governor was on television making his first press conference about these allegations, in which he said, among his denials, I never touched anyone appropriately. And according to the Times-Union newspaper, the woman became emotional. Now, we're not sure what exactly that meant, but it's suggestive that she began crying, I think, or expressed something that alarmed a supervisor who came over to her and said, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" And she began to tell her own story, that he did that to me. He touched me. How dare he say he didn't touch anybody? He did it to me. That's how her story became known. It was immediately told to through others, through the governor's own office, reported her complaint to the attorney general, to other state officials. So, and then ultimately, the governor's office alerted the police that this might result in a crime.
That's what I thought. Good, I got that right. Isn't that astonishing? Like that's not even her coming forward. Like, that's her having a nervous breakdown, listening to her, basically her abuser, deny abusing anybody. And that's kind of the thing with this. It's like the moment that it is very difficult, I would imagine, for a person to put themselves out for something like this. A, he's the governor. B, you may not want that much attention drawn to yourself in this particular way. It screws with your life in general, meaning it's a hurdle or it's baggage that you have to kind of water that you have to carry the moment that you come forward and expose something like this. By the same token, when you don't do it, the person has almost carte blanche to try it again and abuse somebody else. And the same rules for that applies. Also, if the person think they're just an individual and there's kind of these disparate sort, they may not know external to themselves. And it usually often takes that first brave person to come forward of saying, yes, I have no fucks to give. I'm angry about this. Somebody should know. And somebody else comes out. And somebody else comes out. And at the point where you get a few, the other ones that are coming out there have a community of support where they can come out and tell their story. In this very specific case, though, this is kind of different. This is him being seen on television, denying touching anybody, and her seeing that and responding almost in this kind of post-traumatic way to him doing that. I get her on this. So, this doesn't look good for Cuomo. And this doesn't look good for him on a few counts. And that can be, look, on the nursing home thing by itself, or for that matter, on the groping stuff. Either of these could take down a political candidate. And it seems that long knives are drawn. Cuomo hasn't done himself any favors in the way that he's engaged politics over the time he's been in politics. He's known to be vindictive, mean-spirited, all of those things. And so you have this situation where he is up for grabs. And it seems that Democrats and Republicans are rejecting him. Where, of course, the Republicans are going to reject him. The question was always, what were Democrats going to do? And yeah, they're putting him up for impeachment. So, right here. But all this could change on Cuomo's Congress. Right. As of Friday 13th, 19 House Democrats from New York delegation have called for Cuomo's resignation. House Judiciary Chair Jerry Nadler, House Oversight Chair Carrie Maloney, House of Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Jamarl Bowman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I guess the point that I'm saying is they've abandoned him. His own party has basically thrown him overboard. And this number seems to get increasingly longer. And this story did not help, because that story sounds brutal. And when you hear something like that with a person, there's a breakdown over it. It just is different. It feels different as opposed to somebody else coming forward. It's not. I know what it is. I know what it is. Because it's not a person coming forward in strength, if that makes sense. There's something about a person coming forward in strength that is accepted by some but rejected by others. I'm not quite sure why it works that way. Where it's like this woman is strong enough to come forward and say, I'm doing X or Y. But this wasn't strength. This was a show of weakness almost. And it's almost in the context of that show of weakness, somebody seeing it and responding to it. But the very fact of somebody telling somebody else that story about what happened, I don't know how other people experience it, but I experience it in this kind of way of this, I don't know, something about being a show of weakness that does something else to the story. I'm not quite sure how to articulate it yet. All right. I am going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe, and yeah, I think Cuomo is screwed. I thought he was screwed, however. The moment that the sexual assault allegations came out. And if you remember, I made the point that said his story changed. He had one story, I didn't do anything. And then the story became, I was just joking. I was just joking, that's all. And then the story changes again. I didn't know I was making people uncomfortable. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Meaning, if you have to keep changing your story like that, you're trying to find a footing that you believe that you can make a decent argument to rebuff the claims. And you knew there were more claims out there, which means your footing had to change. I guess I was making the point at the time when you were seeing that take place that there's more out there. Like Cuomo is going to have to he's going to have to make the argument that he was just joking to people who were getting groped. I was just jokingly grabbing her vagina. That's what I was doing. When you grabbed her vagina, you was just joking. Yes, I didn't know that I was making people uncomfortable. I didn't know that. Sure you didn't. Sure you did. Like, share, and subscribe.